This is Jim Fetzer of James Fetzer News with Robert Naiman, the National Coordinator of Just Foreign Policy. Robert, I'd like to ask you for your take on the award of the Nobel Peace Prize to Barack Obama.
Well, I think from the perspective of many people in Europe, including the Nobel Committee, it made sense. They were particularly focused on President Obama's diplomatic engagement with Europe, with Russia, the movement towards diplomacy with Iran, particularly around nuclear issues. I don't think they were taking into account what President Obama had in store with respect to Afghanistan. I don't think that was on their radar. And so for those of us in the United States trying to end the war in Afghanistan, it was quite jarring because not only hasn't President Obama moved to end that war, he had just moved to escalate it militarily when he went to Oslo to accept the prize. And I think the question of the hour is whether President Obama is going to follow through on that promise with respect to Afghanistan and seek a negotiating political solution there, or to continue a policy of military escalation.
What you're saying is very consistent with my response when I was a fervent supporter of President Obama as a candidate and expected him to rescind the Patriot Act, abolish the Military Commissions Act, close Guantanamo, pull our forces back from Iraq, and now instead he has introduced 30,000 more troops in Afghanistan and even expanded the use of Predator drones into Pakistan. Can anything be done to change these policies?
Oh, I think absolutely. In particular, we have election coming up. We have elections across the country this year. There are primaries happening right now where there are candidates running on these issues. In the next couple of months, Congress is going to have to vote on the funding for the military escalation in Afghanistan. This is an opportunity for members of Congress to attach conditions like a timetable for the withdrawal of U.S. forces, or requiring the U.S. to push in the direction of diplomacy and a political settlement, a negotiated political settlement. Then there'll be an election in November. And then in 2012, there's going to be an election for president. And the politics of the next few years will be significantly shaped by what the Washington expectations for that election are. Right now, the Washington expectations are a showdown between Barack Obama and Sarah Palin, or maybe Barack Obama and Mitt Romney, and that expectation is pulling things to the right. I think if there were a Democratic primary challenge of President Obama and people in Washington knew that now, I think it would change the politics. If someone like Michael Moore, for example, would toss his hat in the ring and begin to organize so that Obama's advisors knew that they were going to face the Democratic primary electorate in the spring of 2012, I think that would bring about a shift in the Washington political calculations.
Have you noticed any difference in attitude of this administration from that of Bush Cheney in relation to the International Criminal Court? A lot of us believe Bush and Cheney opposed it because they didn't want to be brought before it.
Well, there was a slight shift. There's been an internal debate inside the administration. Some people in the administration want the U.S. to participate in the process, and they've toned down their opposition. It is definitely the case that the two sides of the Washington debate are. One side says, which is sort of the Bush-Cheney view, we need to not only not participate in this, but oppose this and try and scuttle this. And the other view is, no, if we participate in the process, then we can shape it to try and protect U.S. forces. The constituency in Washington that thinks that international law should apply to the United States is very weak. And of course, the United States has tens of thousands of, more than 100,000 forces in Iraq, now approaching 100,000 total U.S. forces in Afghanistan. So obviously this is something that people in Washington are concerned about. We just saw this week 12 civilians were killed, 10 to 14 civilians were killed in a U.S. rocket strike in Marja. The next day, 5 civilians were killed in a NATO airstrike in Kandahar. So obviously, there are many people in the world that would like U.S. officials to be held accountable for war crimes. It should also be pointed out with the International Criminal Court. The basis of the regime is that each country gets the opportunity first to try their own alleged war criminals, and if the United States prosecutes people accused of war crimes, then they never have to fear that Americans will be pulled before an international court. You see this dynamic going on now with the Goldstone report on Israel's invasion of Gaza. The request of the Goldstone report is for Israel to do an investigation, and if Israel fails, then for these allegations to be referred to international authority. Now, we've seen, there have been some prosecutions in the United States, but obviously the record has been quite weak. We've just seen the alleged Blackwater guards, their case get thrown out. The U.S. has said that it will appeal. But so it's very important to recognize that the International Criminal Court is supposed to be a backstop. Nations are supposed to try these allegations first.
Would you agree that the false rationales provided by Bush and Cheney for going into Iraq, the non-existence weapons of mass destruction, the idea that Saddam had been involved in the events of 9/11, or that there were collusion between Saddam and al-Qaeda, were a desperate attempt to conceal that the invasion was a violation of international law, the UN Charter, and even the U.S. Constitution?
Well, it's worth pointing out that even if all those things had been true, which they weren't, but even if they had been, still wouldn't have justified the U.S. invasion under international law. There's 3 cases under the UN Charter, which the United States is a signatory of. It's the document that's the basis of the United Nations. The U.S. not only a signatory, but helped to create the document, helped create the United Nations. There's 3 cases. One is immediate self-defense against armed attack. The second is a military action authorized by the United Nations Security Council. And the third case, everything else, is a war crime. It's a crime against peace, a violation of the United Nations Charter. That would be true even if Saddam had a relationship with al-Qaeda, even if Saddam had weapons of mass destruction, even if Saddam had something to do with the 9/11 attacks. Of course, the fact that none of those three things was true makes the crime even greater, but it was a crime nonetheless.
The use of mercenaries, it seems to me, compounds an already bad situation, but when you have atrocities on the scale of the leveling of Fallujah, which was a holy city in Islam, it seems to me that the repercussions for the public impression of the moral stature of the United States are devastating.
Well, absolutely, and you can see the continuing evidence of that in the discussions of the military assault, the U.S.-led military assault currently underway in Marja in southern Afghanistan, where U.S. officials have said repeatedly, this isn't going to be another Fallujah. We're not going to do to Marja what we did to Fallujah. So even U.S. officials are conceding what a moral black eye the destruction of Fallujah was for the United States. Of course, that was a war crime, and the jury is still out, of course, on what's going to happen in what's already happened. We obviously don't know everything that's happened in Marja. We know that some civilians have already been killed, predictably, but we don't know the scale.
Robert, I can't thank you enough for coming on. I think your organization, Just Foreign Policy, is an extremely important one. Anything that can be done to reduce or eliminate extraordinary rendition, torture, extracting false confessions to support the war on terror has to be done. Thank you very much for your efforts.
Thank you for the opportunity.